I'm with Joe Daigneault, president of the Sipisishk Metis Local 37, and we had an annual meeting here just the last couple months, and a new executive was chosen, and there's been, I guess, a defining moment for Métis politics in our community here in Beauval. We haven't. We've evolved as a municipal government. We've evolved as a Northern Lights provincial school board and a health board. So all this leads to where does the future lead for our Métis citizens and organizing ourselves. So starting off today, Joe, at the annual meeting, you had a new executive chosen. You got a new mandate as the president of the Métis Local. Maybe explain what your thoughts were on the annual meeting and who the executive that you'll be working with till the next annual meeting.
Yeah, so it's for the mandate, I guess, is for 3 years. Every 3 years we have an AGM that where we select the executive. This time around, Fred is the vice president, and Wendy Eldridge is our secretary, and then we have board members. Gina McCollum, you asked Melissa Eldridge, and Nick Daigneault, and Mervyn Morin. So we then guess, and since then we've had a couple meetings. We'd like to have probably more meetings and to get things happening as far as administrative wise, to try to set up an office and move forward with that. There's always seems to be conflicting things that we aren't able to do that. We don't have any funding for one thing. But recently at the MNLA squad, that would have been a spring MNLA, there was an announcement by the CEO that every local would receive $1,000 to set up an office. And whether that's $1,000 a year, D'Amigo, I don't really know, but and then for Atsuma recently, that would be about a week ago, 2 weeks maybe, we received a letter saying that in order for you to claim this, you have to do this, this, and this, and so we did. We sent it in, so we should be receiving our $1,000 to get things happening in our local. But there's always, I guess, things that, in order to get organized, the administrative stuff that I was referring to. As far as trying to get organized locally, because the support is not there from MNS. Matsiga at the regional level is where they're sort of concentrating. So it would that way is not things that impact our local citizens, and so things with duty to consult as schools, or else anything to do with the environment, rights-bearing people, or whether Daigneault as rights-bearing people. There's so many different things, different impacts from the provincial and federal governments. As far as to involve us in the planning, the discussion. Not much of that is happening at the moment, and but we're slowly changing that. We're sort of evolving, because there's other communities, as across and Pine House and places like that. They're sort of pushing back. Historically, you see that. So that's slowly we're making adjustments and changes, and it'll take a lot. That impacts us. There's so many different things, and one of them is duty to consult. And the province at a meeting we hosted a meeting about 2 years, two and a half, and they were doing some work on the old policy, the 2010 policy. A few things in there to amend certain things, and so that it was self-serving. It's only for the province. we in that policy. So until such time, we're not really interested in that duty to consult policy that they have. Mga letters on a regular basis, registered letters on a pitagopege, and then followed up by an email. And usually I respond to those, just telling them that your policy is flawed, and any activity that you do, like if it's forestry or anything to do with the water, the rights bearing people, that's what you must come go, that right. And because that's what that whole policy, duty to consult policy, and that's all it is just impact that policy has on you as a rights bearing person. So definitely everything that you do out in the bush impacts our rights bearing people in the Taugman, and if it's disturbing the trees, you're chasing away the animals where we hunt or trap, where we collect medicinal medicines out in the bush, or berry picking. All of that has impact in the Taugman. So those letters have been consistently sending them to the Ministry of Environment, letting them know, no, we're not allowing you to do these things, but they still go ahead anyway. But at least we're on record that policy is not effective for us. It's not. It's for them only.
Well, one of the topics on that policy, which proves what you're saying, I believe, they removed rights-based and they put interest-based. And that totally changes their duty to consult policy, because interest-based, it's anybody that's interested. It could be a contractor out of Estevan, it could be an airplane company out of Northwest Territories, or a mining company out of France. They're interest-based in the mineral and
the economic perspective, that's how they're.
But the rights-based, as you're saying, they seem to change that language to interest-based. But when you see the evolution, I guess, from the United Nations UNDRIP, the whole recognition of our rights internationally, and then you see Saskatchewan First Act coming in, and then you see Alberta's Sovereignty Act coming in, they seem to be colonial moves again. They want to get to their resources until their hand is slapped. So in organizing, as you said, regionally, I think the Northwest Council, the Northwest Metis Council was certainly something we could have organized regionally with the municipal.
In '94 we had signed that agreement, that stuff. But then, like I've often said, is that when any leadership changes, whether it's with the locals or with the mayors and councils, some of them are not favorable when it comes to that sort of so you're correct. Last about 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting in Isle Cross, and that was with SAS Power, this herbicide spraying along the highway under the power line. And so we got together, that we definitely need to get organized and push from all sides, both the Métis local, the First Nations, the municipalities. So speak up too. We had Louis Gardner from the Métis local in Isle Cross, and then we had Dwayne Favel from Isle Cross mayor, and then we had councillors from Isle Cross. We had our mayor couldn't make it that time, but he had given me some things that some ideas that to move forward. Right now they have an organization of municipalities, New North Sihatio, and so the concept they're presenting now is that they want to go back to the Kayasanan Magagi Axpi Mayor Agitapian. We had the Northwest Municipalities Association. That's kind of how New North evolved. Like, it started with our region that we had gotten organized. And so we want some there's too much going on with New North, so they want to try and break away. And the biggest thing, I guess, is for them is the funding source, because it comes from the trust account for the Northern Trust account. It would talk to Sonia or me to New North, so they can hire someone to help them get organized. Help. I saw to the Gitwan because Piawanina are Metis locals and First Nations. We said August, the so that'd be a good thing to happen, even if we could get organized. Then that way we can present things and then push back on issues. That land claim, that's what's been registered ever since 1994. I mean, it hasn't really moved forward that much. We have a constitution renewal happening with MNS, and it's still in there. And we're going to make sure that it's in there, that we're supposed to have a side table. It's co-chaired by the area directors for Northern Region 3 and Northern Region 2, which is the Laloche Buffalo area, Daigneault, House Beauval area. So they co-chair that, but that's what I don't know. To me, they're going to start doing this, that, and everything else, but beauty Northwest. And I think the reason is a lot of times it has to do with the understanding and the appreciation and the passion that you want to work towards these things. And so we want a land claim, because without land claim we're nobody, like as far as Metis rights. It'd be meaningless ski. So that's so critical, and I've said that ever since I could think back on the gap. It's and people like Philip Shortsy and so many others that historically so it's still moving forward in the courts. It gets bogged down with so many different things that that's what I remember. I forget what year it was, but shortly after that 1994 land claim was registered, Philip Shortio Managipiki when I was working out of the Buffalo Narrows office for Northlands College. So the idea came up that a training program where we train our local people to go and interview elders and document and map out traditional areas that were used by elders and our ancestors. And so all that work it's sat for a long time in a warehouse somewhere. Some of it is at the U of S, University of Saskatchewan, and some of it is with Frank Tafsihasson, a professor out of, he was the one that was kind of leading that out of University of Alberta. So he's got some of that materials. So we're sort of, I guess, to use an old analogy, is that we're dusting off those, all that work that was done, all those maps that were worked on, and so, and then we'll fill in the pieces that are missing. And so the idea behind that is to the land claim, and we're going to end up in court. So we need to get prepared, and that's the way to prepare, because the courts had said that they'll accept the verbal interviews with elders. On main court. And so that's the reason why we did a lot of that, is that let's document all of this. And so that happened, and I guess there's still some new stuff that needs to happen, and eventually land claim we need to push that. And so municipalities need to be on side, because I think ever since we used to talk about it in the 90s and into 2000, municipalities have an opportunity and most of us have what you call a memorandum of understanding, and in Beauval here we're slowly renewing it, and we'll probably be presenting it this fall sometime. as a renewed document to work with. But that's what eventually these communities like Beauval, Zachtawak, and other places like Pine House. It's a little more difficult for Pine House because they've got such an array of different interests. They've got First Nations, Metis, and municipal. But that's what's our community, because we're probably around 90% Metis in our community. And unfortunately, there's lots that are going with C31 that are regaining their First Nations or treaty rights. And but we still have a larger percentage in our communities to become Métis governments in our communities. So it's just a matter of working together and pushing for that with the provincial government. And in the province, and then we can probably work with the federal government because they're the ones ultimately that are responsible for Métis, the First Nations.
I see the urgency, I guess, the province is putting on some of its policies, but I think what they're anticipating is that we'll collect ourselves and organize ourselves in this unorganized area. We have no rural municipalities up here. There's no money flowing into our fur blocks from the province. The regional planning, the economic planning is all in the south. They're still like treating us like a colony. They want to get our logs. Recently, they increased the output from the logging industry to 80%. Here's the province challenging the logging companies to increase their output to 80%. That's not conservation. That's not respecting our backyard here.
It's all driven by economy
and as you said, working together is a challenge. And remember a few years ago when Mystic was being anticipated with their forest lease, when we had a meeting at Daigneault, the province used divide and conquer tactics, and you still see that today.
It's obvious, yeah.
So to bring it better, to make it stronger in the north, do you see First Nations, Métis, and municipal ever coming together? Is that, to me, like we always look at the municipal and Métis, but the First Nations are right here. The tribal councils are right here. They're claiming traditional lands as well. And if you look at our history, Treaty 10 was signed in Alacrosse. In the meantime, a scam was being pulled with script on our Métis people. So if you go back to that Treaty 10 history, we should have been signing treaty as full treaty rights holders. And if that's the common playing field, maybe adhesion to treaty is the angle for us to work on, because you see the fight in Ontario with the Métis and the Assembly of First Nations are at loggerheads right now. But if we joined the treaties as full-fledged treaties, because that's what Canada's based on. Canada's foundation is treaty. And if we follow that trail as Métis people, maybe that's the strategy we should be using. And I don't see that happening in our communities. I see Treaty 10 signatories, Pachinak, Canoe Lake, Waterhen, Wollaston, they're coming together as a treaty, but the Métis are on the perimeters, either seeking, like you said, C31 membership and finding, sometimes they're not welcome into these programs and services. But we should be planning our region, and the regional government, that was promised to us back in the 80s. It went to northern Quebec. It was a land-based challenge for the Inuit, and same thing with Nunavut. It was a land base that went into regional government. So maybe let's talk about what the potential could be for resurfacing a regional government here, like even our own province.
I think it's necessary because that's what's whenever we had a lot of forest fires, and likely because of climate change in areas that have never really seen that much burn happening, because it's of the dryness of the way. But when in here, that's what's mystic. The other one is Sagawa Ski, and then there's other companies.
Carrier.
Yeah, yeah, tik unen here that was the licenses for harvesting timber. So Mayogi way that's all fires damages an area that they've identified as their commercial harvesting area. Yeah, see, Bagana, the province will come back to us as locals, as rights-bearing people. The Pitsamo got a registered letter saying that because of the forest fires that had burnt in this area, we have to consider allowing a carrier to go into this area where, we had identified as a place where they shouldn't be going into. So it would end those letters on duty to consult man on here. The pizza mo we went in here. We could sweep in a order cut plan all of a sudden because of the forest fires. Because there's where the fire has gone through, that timber is a loss for them. So me go put it in order for them to sustain their mills. So yeah, you're gonna First Nations and Metis, was the municipalities. That would be the ideal. What I've been hearing from our president of MNS is that the First Nations and I guess the way they do a lot of their business is Gulf and Indomitao, so that's what they've been doing a lot. And so that's what MLTC, what PAGC, they're really, really keen in working with MNS to the mamorto skatamaho for these common issues that we have, and as far as rights, it was the land basis. So, utigino but we need to move forward with that on the northwest side of the, and a lot of it has to do with the population base. We're mostly Métis in this area, and historically that's what it's been. And we have an area where we've done a lot of our traditional activities, and so we have a lot of influence in that. We have a say in what happens into the future. The bombing range the access, or meeting with Swagigwe. But that's something our legal is working on right now. There's supposed to be a sitting down with the National Defense Department, DND. Anyway, they're starting that discussion. We should be accessing the three big lakes that are in that bombing range for commercial fishing, if it's a viable thing for our fishers to go there. It was to mean hunting and trapping. So that access agreement will allow us to do that, because on the Alberta side, they've been doing that historically. They've been doing that for a long time. Keno Lake First Nations, Dillon Wistall, and I hear they just recently got settlements for land that that was taken away from the Buffalo River. That's what's there was a major settlement there. That's what were left out of that whole picture for that reason. Is that's what's from that's what in land script, money script. We gave up our rights, but that's just a scam that they were pulling off, and it's just a way to acquire land. My dad that they were assigned land in somewhere in the North Battleford area, and so we don't even know where that is. Documentation, and so Takashino in Battleford, that wouldn't be 15 on that. It would be the ideal for us, I guess, as a family. So that's just the way they went about these Indian agents. They didn't do a very good job in promoting the concept. All they were doing basically was taking away the land and the cash and giving it to speculators, and land speculators. And there was there's evidence out there that that there's evidence there in La Loche as this one family land script somewhere in Humboldt area. So somebody in Humboldt, a lawyer, got that land for and it was fraudulent. So
Yeah.
there was a court case on that too, but I don't know what the outcome or if it is even dealt with. I don't know. But that's the sort of thing that had gone on historically. So tapui the mamo to skata mapugi go, and I'm hoping that and it requires anything you do it requires money. So if you want to do things, you got to have the money to be able to do it in order to hire the consultants or the people that need to do the work for you. And I remember you saying that at the conference that we had recently at the tourism and that a business or that post with some sort of investors in order to bring that idea to fruition. And so yeah.
Well, in terms of developmental money, I guess there's infrastructure that's of high cost. And if you look in the past, we had an opportunity with DRE, the Department of Regional Economic Expansion, back in DNS days. We were on our way to get a regional government with the Northern Municipal Council.
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like the legislation that the province was going to use was they were going to create one rural municipality, the whole north, and fund that rural municipality with 5 councillors and a reeve. So today there is no flow of RM money. Like if you look at the RM budgets in this province, they have graders, they have earth movers, they have culverts, they have bulldozers. In every RM, pretty well every community from Meadow Lake, Canwood, Big River, there's RMs outside the municipal government.
Yeah.
Now, we don't get that. Maybe that's the stand we should make. A logging.
I've read about so much of this where AFN in that organization, they don't agree with the concept of becoming a municipal government. They want to govern themselves the way they've always have governed themselves historically through some lineage, hereditary. Rather than going through the municipal, because once you become a municipal governance structure, you have to answer to someone and higher up. That's what.
Yeah.
So we have to retain our rights and we have to identity and it's kind of interesting. This morning I was on a survey on online. Angus Reid was here, so it's a big company in Canada that does maybe they're even beyond Canada, but they do surveys on and that's the sort of thing I was saying was that's what's governments or how to take things away from rights-bearing people. So there is a high percentage that say that we need to recognize this whole reconciliation against Canadians, what that whole concept is. So in the survey, 60% that's what's that rights-bearing people, Indigenous in general, in Canada, have a special status, and that's the way they need to be dealt with. I think around 30% where they shouldn't have any special status. They shouldn't have any special funding for any programming or anything. They should sort of be able to be self-sustaining and become part of that whole assimilation concept. About 30% exist in Canadians. And so that Angus Reid survey, but in a way, they're not educated on the history of Canada. Like Canada was inhabited by First Nations, First People. We all would be the settlers. The reason why that happened is because of the Pope, for one thing, using religion, that doctrine of discovery, and that's what gave him the right. That's what it be. taga pinatsig me dapat sinaw me nanton luig. Since that attitude still prevails to this day because of that. So the only way that's ever going to change is through to educate people in general. So the first contact with that program, you see a lot of that. It just comes out in some of those, some of the things. Like this one guy who he would done with that first contact program on APTN. He lived by a residential school. He didn't know the history of that. Residential school. He's always lived there all his life. He didn't understand what that whole residential school thing was about. And so we actually was starting to learn about that and the things that happen in those schools. So
Well, I guess the challenge, as we said, is finding a model that works. There's one that was developed, like I said, the North Municipal Council was here ready to be enacted in the province. A change of government killed it, but the Inuit in northern Quebec snagged onto it and created Nunavik. And then just recently, the James Bay Cree accepted a lot of that regional government concept while protecting their Cree rights.
Yeah.
So the new instruments like that regional government, the Cree Naskapi Act, if you look at it, the modern day language protects the indigenous rights. And the United Nations Declaration internationally, that's our umbrella of protecting our rights.
Yeah.
This colonial practice of taking our land without consultation, and on the treaty side, it's sharing and caring. That's what we're meant to share. As you said, to be pushed aside. So maybe it's a model that we should be working on, that the citizens, First Nations, Metis, non-Indigenous, everybody in the North, if we created a regional government model or a government model that respects the Metis rights, the First Nations rights, Canadian rights, and let's design, it'd be like a new deal. Let's build our highways, let's build our communities, our housing, our health system, our education system. All these could be within our realm of governing instead of the province. Right now, the province treats us like a colony. The decisions are all made down south.
Kustamoga a lot of those ministers northwest in the north in general. Yeah.
So I think it's us. I think it's our families. We're related to the First Nations. Our mothers, our grandmothers, our grandparents. We're all intertwined with these different families from different communities. So if we can come together with a model that the people can accept, I don't think our leaders will follow if the people all stand together.
Yeah. That's so true. Yeah. So mistato magenota das would say First Nations kaituine pogenoma the Liberty side of the family. We just recently found out that Daigneault Lake, our great grandmother that's where she's from. And so my sister pursued that, Yvonne, my sister, she pursued that and she got her treaty rights. So that means that I could become treaty if I chose to go that route, like through my grandmother out of Daigneault Lake. And then on my grandfather's side in De Rocher, flying Dastagani Yuhtohtite, our great-grandfather. So there's that connection. So it's true what you're saying, that there's so many of our relatives are in these First Nations, and that's what in First Nations, the reserves that they're sort of confined into one area. As reserve people. So that's kind of the thing that they don't want to see. Always in the Northwest Genoma, we need to have a bigger influence than just the Metis. They're saying that already, even in hunting, the provincial government, they keep losing cases where they're trying to restrict people, and you can't hunt beyond the NAD line, and yet there's been some people that had gone into the Meadow Lake area, into the Spiritwood area, and then on the Manitoba side, in the border, those cases, the provincial government, but they push that whole thing about you can't hunt there. Mati crown land guy tastig in our the rights that we have, any crown land guy tastig. And so the next thing they did is the Saskatchewan first to we took all of that crown land, and we don't have any place
Right.
to hunt and exercise our rights. I think that's what the intent is. So you know if it's a lease for wild rice growing, or if it's a trappers or fishers, kawanita those leases, guide all the lease fees that are required. The province collects fees. We need to take over that whole thing as a Métis nation. Now that we have our rights recognized, just got to take over those people that have an area that they've always occupied. Just because of a concept that was developed by the province, lease. They shouldn't be able to enforce that. I think the treaty or any rights buried person, they should have the authority to say no, and we should be the ones that's those locals to say that you have a permit, and that's only for just for organizing us to the governance, to say that you spend all your life your family, your ancestors, or then that should be left that way. And for blocks when they were introduced, the traditional way of life. Whether you had a license for an area, that's a concept the province introduced just to control people. Out in the bush, the traditional lifestyle that our ancestors had. And so the way they did it was for blocks. And what that does, it pits people against one another. That's what Saktoach in 12 and 14. That's what there's always that little the boundary. I've seen that. I've witnessed it in the past when I was still a young man out in the bush. And I see in our camp. And that shouldn't be happening. That's why we're and that's the way the province wants it. So that whole concept of fur blocks that needs to be done away with, and we need to have the historical places that our ancestors have gone. Right into the territories. So many of these other lakes. So and then we say that this is the land that we've made a living on, or the lifestyle that we had, and we should continue to do that sort of thing. That's kind of the ultimate way of I look at it.
Well, that's the governance of the region, I guess, that you talk about. The need for inter-community, international, I guess, between nations as well, between the Cree, Dene, Métis. But just on the Métis local side, have the Métis locals been following the fur block boundaries as their local boundaries? I always assumed it wasn't the town, like if you're in Beauval Métis local, but it's not the Métis municipal boundaries that you're following.
No.
I always thought you were respecting fur blocks, like the Alacrosse fur block, and locals follow those, right?
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. That we follow those because that's a concept that was introduced, and that's how people understand it. But that's what Northern Region 3, we have an influence in that whole area for Métis. That's what says rights-bearing people. So to confine it into just in 12, that's what's, or in 14 or whatever, that is a whole different construct that the province had introduced in the 30s. And so the old way of doing things, and it shouldn't be in 12 and 14, 13, whatever. my dad and Ixian in a bombing range igindo 3 different locations and at cabins igindo pahigi tsigi paktaha tsigi mati tsig my naging wag XP until the 30s XP when the fur blocks were established. That's when he was setting out to go set his nets XP commercial fishing in the wintertime. Snow bug behind me to the piggy south to go home we was paktaha sit. So that's the sort of devastation that occurred when the fur blocks were established, and so I'd say the fur blocks, but we recognize them, and they're there, and fur blocks are open to anyone. Like you could be treaty living in that area that you can get your license, and you could be indigenous. You could get your license and go trap in that area. So. We got to try to make sure that from our perspective and then as rights-bearing people. Yeah.
Just on that rights-bearing people, that to me that comes from sovereign nations. A sovereign Cree nation can sign a treaty with the British Crown. So when we refer to those treaties, those are the Crown treaties that the colonial government, under international law wanted to ascertain land. But before the Crown showed up, there was treaties amongst our nations. Mm-hmm. There was understandings between the Cree, the Dene, the Blackfoot, the Ojibwe.
Respected,
And so today, should there be a treaty amongst our nations, amongst the Cree, the Dene, the Metis? Should we have an understanding like, if somebody gets married and you have a trapper's cabin in another community, what's the relationship? Our kids, some of them are C31s, some of them are ascertaining their rights through history, but we have to come to work together. I don't see that common working together and common understanding, and maybe it's some homework that we have to do for ourselves on the indigenous sovereign side, not without the Crown, nothing to do with the province or the federal government, just amongst ourselves, make an agreement, a treaty amongst our nations so our people know how to conduct
that would be the
themselves.
ideal concept, and I think it takes a lot to be able to work in that direction. And this is where I see that's what say. And I used to say this to our M&S government, is that the province or the federal government in order for us to take on that role of that's what's a rights-bearing government. So that's when they started using that we're a government to Agdamiti. That's what's because we have to self-declare those things, and that's that you're a rights-bearing person. We need to understand that we have a right, and so we need to establish those workings. A lot of this stuff, and so it helps when you start working towards. That's what's. Let's use the example of hunting. That's what's. We need to have our own regulations, our laws, guidelines. Like our hunters, our Métis hunters. So they shouldn't be imposing the provincial lawsuits telling us that you can't hunt after dark. Maybe it's not right, so we tell our own people and make our own laws and regulations saying that you can't hunt at night. We've made that decision. When I was studying at university, Gabriel Dumont, he organized buffalo hunts, and they had rules. And when you broke those rules, there was a lot of consequences that you had to face, and some of them were pretty severe. So, that whole concept Louis Riel and Gabriel Dumont had, that whenever you're going to do something, it has to be done as a collective, first of all, as rights-bearing individuals. And then you got to have certain rules, regulations. You don't want to call them that, but traditions.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's required. You can't just let loose. Rights I don't see that. There's a few that might overkill, but a lot of them, they'll respect that an animal, and they'll share it in the community, and they're carrying on that sort of tradition, which is excellent.
Yeah. Just, I guess, just to see how the Métis have organized. You see the history of Manitoba, where Louis Riel and the Council of, as you said, Gabriel Dumont, the families, the family heads made those decisions, and they entered Confederation, negotiating a province in their area, and eventually the colonial governments take over. Mm-hmm. Now today you see a First Nations premier out of Manitoba, mm-hmm. and willing to address a lot of the long-standing issues. But as they came out of Manitoba, then Batoche came as I guess a resistance to the colonial policies.
Red River, and then
so
Batoche.
after the Batoche, the Canadian brought their policies, but was there ever a peace treaty after Batoche? To me, I still think we're being on the enemy side. We're treated like the enemy, like we're risk management. We're in their way of their plans. Like you mentioned, regional plans for the north, that we don't know what's, this 80% logging policy that was imposed on the logging industry. It was never called on by the communities, and all that product that's being driven out of Meadow Lake, Big River, none of those 2x4s or OSB plywood is coming up here. And so in Batoche, we celebrate the existence, of our survival, but should a peace treaty be endeavored there to put the record straight that we're here to work for the government, to work to a common...
There are those that'll dispute that there was never there's no reason to negotiate a peace agreement, because there was no real, they didn't go to war. Like when you say peace, so many of it conjures up the memory of a war. That was First World War, Second World War, and then you negotiate a peace agreement. And in Batoche, it was never that. It was a resistance more than anything, because what happened historically, when you look at the history of Batoche, is that they were farming. And these lots of river lots, they had these long strips of lots right down to the river's edge, so that they could access the water from the river. I think is the purpose for having those lots that way, those strips. And the government, surveyors, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, that change those boundaries and make them into the square lots. And that's where the resistance happened, is that you shouldn't be imposing these things on us. It with the argument, and I can understand, because they were chased away from Red River, Louis Riel and Gabriel Dumont, and people that followed them. They relocated in Batoche area, started living there and making a good, living out of just self-sustaining from the land. And so the government Pizza Hut to be the square settlers, and that's how I understood the history. And so that's where it was a resistance. And whether a peace treaty, I kind of dispute it, and there's others that likely will dispute that there shouldn't be a peace treaty, and it may be some sort of other understanding, but not a peace treaty kind of thing.
Yeah, the reason I bring that up is Remembrance Day is coming up here shortly, but under the Peace Tower in Ottawa, in Parliament, there is a book of remembrance of all the soldiers that died at all the conflicts, World War One, World War Two, Korea War. But in that book of resistance or remembrance is also the Northwest Rebellion. So from the Crown side, they deployed the army.
Yeah.
It was, from their view, an engagement.
Well, John A.
Already.
MacDonald was
Yes.
his drinking buddies at Pizza Hut on the
Yeah.
train.
So to dismantle that policy, like you still look at the Princess Patricia, these are, Steele. These are names on their side that they still celebrate from winning that war. That to me, it was a war. They brought out the cannons, they brought out the muskets, everything.
The Gatling gun
The
was
Gatling
introduced.
gun, yeah.
Introduced.
So in government policy, they've looked at us as an adversary. That's why I think that's the missing link on getting a proper relationship is a peace treaty at Batoche. But the other,
If you don't mind, I'm going to discuss this with our representative war veterans. They want me to pursue the history behind that through our legal team. Metis, that's what maybe it doesn't fit whatever criteria the government used to say that this was a war.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's why they don't. There was several times there was calls for to exonerate Louis Riel, and because it wasn't really treason when it comes to what they did. They attacked the Metis that were in Batoche, or whatever the whole purpose behind that was. When you think about it from a human, your brain, how that came about. There was only a few Metis or First Nations that were living in that area. It's an army of Northwest police. That's the before they were known as. Now they're known as RCMP, Northwest
Mounted Police.
Yeah, because we were a Northwest Territory back then.
Yeah.
We weren't a province yet. We weren't part of Canada. So there's so many different arguments that you can argue that point that this was never a war. It was just a resistance or just trying to hold our own. And there was a church there, obviously. So the religious people were there already. So yeah.
Well, as part of that history, along with the hanging of Louis Riel, there was also 9 First Nations leaders hung in North Battleford. And the history, some of the questions being raised are like Green Lake. Green Lake community is looking that maybe one of those chiefs was the Green Lake chief. And that history, it's suppressed by the Crown. They won't let you know, but our own research, we need to look at the past of where these decisions were made. Like those 9 that were hung, for what reason?
Yeah.
And now today I see in the news, they just recently, because, some First Nations like Muskeg Lake or Mistawasis, I'm not sure which exactly, but they're getting repayment back because the Crown had held their transfer payments.
Right. Yeah.
Because they were accused that they were helping the Northwest Rebellion. So today now they're correcting those wrongs, and that's why I bring this up. If history can clarify what actually happened. I think, maybe Green Lake is a full-fledged First Nations
perhaps,
community.
With the townships that they were awarded, because they by training then just south of Green Lake, that's where the railway had come into that area, and so you posted in boxcars, Pigapatini, with the promise of land, you was to food you immediately. You got back to Pigapatini. Maybe I got to after that. So yeah.
Well, that's that land issue of road allowance. Like farmers are giving tracts of land, in the Metis communities.
Yeah.
That's why I said, to me, we were treated like an adversary.
Yeah.
You know, we weren't partners in confederation. We were like the enemy. You know, how come we ended up in the ditch when all these farmers getting all the pristine land they could
Living
do?
in a ditch and building our little, you know,
Yeah, and then
homes
today
with-
we look at the north. We're back up here now,
Yeah.
and now they're looking at first, you know, Saskatchewan first leases, outfitting leases, timber leases, mineral
So
leases.
that's the way they're pushing us.
And where's the
out.
Métis again?
Yeah.
We're stuck in this municipal government that is controlled by an urban minister, but it's not sovereign land. So, so I guess to carry this baggage through, a lot of concern is on addictions,
Yes.
health, mental health for us today, and housing. And to me, you know, a healthy family, a lot of our young people, you see these meth addictions hitting all of us are being impacted by this.
Yeah, the whole
And
country.
it seems like we can't control it. Like we have no control of our community.
Yeah.
You know, we depend on the Crown to bring the RCMP services or the medical health services to deal with these addictions, but they're not working. There's no path for an addict to find a proper way of getting themselves out of this. I don't know.
Well, big way and I've said this before. When I sat on Northern Light School Division, I pushed for land-based education because I understood that a lot of these kids, this whole concept of being in a classroom, and there's so much potential. There's so much risk for them to be in a classroom. Whereas when they're outdoors, learning things outdoors, and it must be in our DNA that you feel more at ease when you're outdoors in the bush, as a person that's from the bush. So in a classroom, they go ahead to to this day, I think they struggle with that. And so that land-based education or my experiential learning, that was my favorite strategy when I was learning about teaching. Experiential learning means so much for those individuals that are whatever it is, whatever concept they're learning. They can internalize things by experiencing and at the same time reading about it. When you're in a classroom, a teacher speaks about this and you're supposed to listen, pay attention, and there's so many distractions. That whole concept where you lecture the students, they don't learn as much. But when they're hands-on, that's when they internalize stuff and learn things. So that, land-based education plus experiential learning, hands-on, I think that's the best way to go with education. And I think that's where you can get away from these social, societal type of difficulties that we're struggling with right now. That's what's these addictions with alcohol, drugs, and other addictions that are out there. You have to have that solid understanding of who you are and where you came from. If your lifestyle was in the bush, in order to be able to understand these. Growing up in the bush, to me, I think that's what made me really strong when it comes to alcohol, drug use, and all this stuff. There was a concept that was never in our lives. We were happy. We were living off the land. We meet for dinner. You go in the lake, go shoot a duck or snare a rabbit or something. You meet son. So you grew up, and that's sort of in the back of your mind all the time. And so many people that struggle, and a lot of them, when you look at them, they've never experienced being out in the bush. You hear about people that have never left the boundaries of a community. It's sad, beyond that, and I can understand in this day and age why they can't do that as much as before, because you go so many different policies and rules and regulations. And you're breaking a rule or a law, or regulation. So we need to get that back, so that people can live off the land and be happy out in the land. And I think Pine House has got a good model there where they take people out in the land, the ones that are struggling with addictions. The only problem I see with that, it's an excellent way to program out in the bush, but kind of that place where they go and get cleaned up. They're back in the same situation in their community, so that we need to have something and that's something that we're working towards. We need to have those supports in the community. And then they come back to the same old, and then they get back into whatever they were struggling with to begin with. So that's the missing link right there. In every community where they have the supports. And the amount of money that's spent on people that are getting cleaned up, the supports for their family, and the one program, that Jordan's Principle, that's the program. To try to get away from that. Why not invest those kind of monies with people before they get to that stage, before they get into addictions and then losing their family and whatever? Support them in the community while they're still together as a unit, family unit. They're traumatized for life, right? Because of that separation and then being hauled by taxi to wherever. And I see that so much happening. That needs to stop, and we need to have our own local systems with the resources that are needed at the local level. Otherwise, it'll never change.
Yeah, you were talking about education and I guess creating an education system that respects our way of life. But we do have that right. We have a right to create our own education systems. Like, I question why we take a summer holiday.
Yeah.
Summer holidays were like for factories, people working in factories.
Farmers was the reason why.
So
June, July, July, August, because farming was.
So if we revisit our education system, make it so the education system is year round, even 7 days a week. Why do we stop Saturday and Sunday? In the summer when all the harvesting and the plants are growing, we take the education system away from the kids, our traditional education system, And the other part is we talk about the bombing range. Why couldn't the military, some countries have military service as part of their youth. Like, a lot of us is idle time. A lot of our kids are either into criminal activities, and petty crime leads to a criminal record. But if we keep them active, if we keep them occupied, I think sports academies were one thing. But regionally, I think we have to do it like you said. The strength is in the region. Each community doing it on its own, it won't be enough. We have to support each other as a whole region.
But you have to have the supports in the community as well,
Yeah, the citizens have to be there, So you got to design a new health system, a new education system, a new infrastructure system, a new environmental system, how to keep the rivers. And so it's governance. We're back to governance. So it's...
Religion, has a big influence in the lives of people. Like that whole concept was introduced by a government. That's the Roman Catholic Church, the Anglicans, and when you watch movies like The Black Robe, and it's the whole base behind that is the history. It's based on the truth, the history of what had gone on in the past. Maybe it's just a really small kind of window that you're looking through when you watch that kind of a movie, but that you know exactly where that came from. And so our history, they're influenced by religion, and maybe that's what's driving them batty when it comes to you have to believe in the Virgin Mary, you have to believe in Jesus Christ, right? Especially when there's a conflict between that and the whole theory of evolution through science. So it's confusing for many people, even adults and kids. They're confused at the way this whole concept of Santa Claus or Easter Bunny and all this stuff, fairy tales. So when you talk about traditional education, like the lifestyles that we had in the past, our creator, land-based education, they have to take those into consideration and leave the other stuff for people, whatever they want to believe later on. We thought that there's a Santa Claus, then so be it. Just let them, with their own way of thinking, let them believe that sort of thing. But you need to always go back to the land, the traditional lifestyles, the traditions that had gone on in the past. And so, yeah, and that's, I don't know. There's so many different things that we have to deal with in the communities. So we're trying to address them, I guess, in a way through our local. We have a service center that's coming to Beauval. I don't know how quickly it will happen, but just the other day, it's been kind of to my, I feel confident it's going to go ahead. It's a service center concept where we have a facility in the community where Métis people can go to receive any kind of service that is required. There'll be an office there for the local, the area director, Stamina office in that building. And it'll be a commercial kitchen, and eventually I'm hoping that we'll have a friendship center, because there'll be an open kind of a town hall kind of a concept as well in that the design of the building. So yeah, that's coming, and so perhaps we need to grow from that. Once we have that facility in our community, then we can grow, because there's so many different programs that one can get resources from, federal or provincial, through the health system. But again, those different concepts, those different things that you were just mentioning, as to the things that I talk about, I think we need to design those things from our perspective. The models that are being used out there, the best practices that are happening out there, then in order for us to succeed. Otherwise, we keep using the same old, it will end up in the same problems. Yeah.
Well, the one that comes to mind of education governance was à la Crosse, when they, I guess, revolted from the parish-run or the church-run school system, and all our schools were similar to that.
Yeah.
But à la Crosse got their independent school board. But it's not a Métis school board. It's still a public provincial school board, right? So maybe now is the time to look at Métis governance in schools, because schools are, First Nations have their own schools. They design to protect their culture, their language, as you said, their way of life. Maybe that's one of the first strategies we should be working on, is looking at an education system that serves our people and is funded. If it's going to be federal funding, transfer payments, then it's not a provincial school system. It's our own Métis school system, and it may be not only one community, but it could be a regional school division. So, any thoughts?
That would be Moti. We're sitting in a very good position where we would be able to pursue that sort of thing on the west side. But I can see there'll be some communities that will resist that sort of thing, unfortunately. But that doesn't mean that it can't move forward.
Right.
Because I see a lot of the schools, when they have Métis or First Nations principals that are running the schools. So I see that whole concept they have it in their minds that would be the best way to do it, probably, is, just look at this curriculum where, in the States, the books are the ones that are trying to remove from the school system. But that happens even in our own system, because it's a public school. and it's publicly funded education that we certain things, and I experienced that when I was sitting in the Saskatchewan School Boards Association. I used to try to introduce things that were nowadays you hear about so much, the whole concept of this reconciliation and residential school and the trauma that it caused with many folks, that we need to address that through the education system. There was a lot of racism, and it still continues to this day, and it becomes obvious when you go to a place like that, the Saskatchewan School Boards Association, because it includes the whole province, and in certain parts of the province, these representatives, those attitudes that are from that area. So and they'll put you down and say, because their perspective is from the settler, their attitude, So, any concept that you try to introduce, it's nice to have, and I was involved in the hiring of the guy that we have there, but there's two of them that were leading the CEO of Saskatchewan School Boards Association. It's nice to have those people there, but that doesn't mean that they can change things.
No.
They have their own ideas, but they can't use those same ideas they have, because the influence is coming from the settler concept.
No, I think the education system has to be designed not under the Provincial Education Act. It's got to be our own structure.
From this area.
I think that's the other result that we're having after losing Nortep and Norpac here.
Mm-hmm.
We have so much teacher shortage. We have 7 teachers in Sandy Bay still vacant today.
Wow.
And Laloche, Pine House, last year we had one full empty position here in Beauval. So you've seen that evolution of, teacher education has to be part of the education system as well, because each community you can't just centralize it in Cumberland or Alacrosse, or it's got to be all communities having fair access, and that's what I liked about Nortep.
The concept of community based is good, but Nortep addressed that.
Yeah.
And the way they did it was by having people go into their communities and actually practice in their home community under the guidance of the teacher. So I went through that program this time, and man, that was really
it brought the North together. Yes.
Yeah, a great experience. As an individual working under a teacher, and you really see two perspectives there. In the classroom, from my perspective, their perspective. So I think they were learning lots from me. Plus, I was probably learning lots about who they were and that. So, that's missing around Mayo when you put it into one community.
And you never relocated, right? You never had to change your residency.
No.
Right now, people are relocating families to these for education purpose, and Nortep was never designed for that.
No,
so.
no.
Well, in closing, Joe, I appreciate the leadership you're providing. I think the development is still the challenge. What's your next step? What's your hope? What can we achieve in this next? You have a 3-year mandate. There's also the MNS provincial elections will be taking place. Area director and the presidency, the executives will be. That's in 2024, I hear. Is there anything you'd like to say about those?
Well, I guess at the local, I'm hoping that, and I keep hearing this, that through the whole revision of the Métis Constitution for our province, that provisions are included in there for local supports. Right now, what they're struggling with is they follow the model of municipal governments, and it's always about money. That's the bottom line. I forget what the numbers were, but every year you have to be able to set aside from your budget this many millions specifically for locals because to be able to govern at the local level. And to me, that's where the base is, and that's where you need to build from. And that's just me, the way I see things. But Miwachoma, they're looking at it at the regional level, and I said this earlier that I think that's how it will continue until changes happen with the constitution, and once the funding sources to me now, if there's an increase in the amount of money that's being transferred from the federal government, that may change the whole way of thinking. It's not that MNS doesn't support the concept of having locals being funded, but it's just the cost of funding locals to be able to have offices and whatnot. But I see, yeah, it takes a lot of work. Like, it's not like right now we're all volunteering as locals, executive kapiyahe with the. That's when me wasn't me go, and I have my own laptop, my own cell phone, and so I try to do things with just on my own with a local executive, and but stock our own things, and so that's evolving somewhat, and the support is coming from the municipalities. So Northern Village of Beauval, when it comes to if we're going to be hosting any kind of a meeting, that's would still provide us a facility at no charge. And again, it's because of the MOU that we had signed a few years back, and now we're revising that MOU that'll include an economic development wing as to bakit we'll be able to the staff that we need to achieve things. But right now, I guess it's at the provincial level. We're trying to encourage them to work through us at the local level, so that we can, disseminate the information as to the programming. If there's dollars to be had for health, as an example, that's one major struggle is in the area of health, where people need supports when they have to go out and seek out whatever health kind of service that they require. So that's just one, there's so many other things, but eventually I think we'll get there. It's just a matter of time. And at the regional level, I think there could be a lot more happening likely. With COVID, we went through a couple of years there, but all of that, that needs to evolve to a point where whoever is going to be our area director after the election, I think that's the work is going to be immense. It's going to be a lot. You see that at the local level, you're going to see that at the regional level, and then eventually at the provincial level. So I think we're heading in the right direction, and some of the things that we talked about, I think we need to address them, and some of them may be just in our area, the northwest side of because of the population base that we have of Metis. So I think we have a good future. So.
Well, with a good future, Joe, we thank you. This is Treaty 10 News, Rick La Liberty at CIPI TV from Beauval.
Itimutian Akamaduna ni pawin ipasapian akama dumamatusit kauya magamato mo arnestin we sawan we do ne pia kawi sawan kawapam tunano kawi magamato mo arnestin itemohtian kamaduna ni pawet
Quigo Alphonse, Quisagataon!
Arnestin anyo
And you made Rick La Liberty cry. Here you go, Hannah, piece of Kleenex. Who else was crying in his Kleenex? The president, you made the president cry, Alphonse. Here you go. Kung magigway ka mina toilet paper, inuhti pa yan, Alphonse.
Di mausip kami ni Juan ma
Uti da my secret compartment. Don't worry about it. That's where your old age is too. It's collecting interest.
Arnestin, and I knew your kokom would be lonesome and crying when I wrote that song for her. So I wrote her a happier song. And I showed this song to our Nusim. I showed it to my Nusim Nap, Arnestin, our little Nusim. And I showed him how to play it, and it's a happier song. I know your kokum would be happy. So I'm gonna get my little Nusim Nap, Astam. O tipi dohti, I'm gonna get you to sing the song that I wrote for your kokum, Arnestin. It's called
It's a secret, Alphonse. It's a Victoria's
Kis
secret.
Pen Kisagihin, Arnestin.
Oh, I like that song, Alphonse.
Yeah, Wimsum na mo.
Yeah.
That's it. You guys might start. Okay, thank you very much, Mushu. Gespen gesagin, sein magbiotchimen. Automobil gepusen, no saget tawa keturtano. Gespen gesagin, sein magbiotchimen.
Wow!
Gespen gesagin, sein magbiotchimen. Dar kanuga pusen, no sipisishk mano. Gespen gesagin, sein magbiotchimen. It gets a little naughty, ladies and gentlemen. Gespen gesagin, sein magbiotchimen. Oh! Waposhoyan kagwanahono. Kapitipis. Katuikwamino. Gespen gesagin, sein magbiotchimen.
Oh, all right. Hey, Arnestin. We're so proud of our little grandson on one nap. He's a good singer. He's just like his mushroom, cha.
You showed him how to sing, Alphonse. Wow! Just like your kokomam. Just, you know what, Imatsin nanampe, Alphonse. My sugar by Jesus. I'm gonna have to go eat pretty soon, Alphonse. But anyways, before I leave with my nusamak, I want to share a story with you. Tell Alphonse. Okay. With the story or the poem?
The poem, Arnestin.
The poem. Hey, I like it when his little English, the poem. But nusamak, you know me in your mushroom na natuki gwe pitos and biwa partina no ma. Nutsagwe so vaccine unianan. You know, we've seen so many different changes even up here to Alphonse. When we grew it up, we didn't have made to go disappearing, Alphonse. You know, the flushing of the toilet, where you flick a little knob and then you turn on your power. And then these young girls are always complaining, oh, I'm so tired of the housework. They're flicking buttons. Wah. You put in the clothes and you turn it a knob. And your washing's done. Not like me, I used to have to do this till my fingers were bleeding, Alphonse. But anyways, that's a different time. But Nusamak, your Kukum wanted to be a country music singer when I started off in life. So I'm just going to give you a little taste of how I sound. Then I'll end it with a poem. So across the lake, Umamana, I used to walk by the rocks and Kukum would be singing from the top of her lungs. Nusamak, oh, gimpahim tax. And I sounded so pretty because I was the only one who was singing. Anyways, my favorite song, it's Alphonse. Far across the blue waters lives my old Alphonse, by the Beaver River, where I loved him and left him, but I can't forget him. I miss my pretty Alphonse. Wah, wah. Yo.
Yeah.
I thought maybe you guys were all sleeping. Wah, wah. But Nusamak, Minyor Mushum, we are very honored. Nimyuktinan manakapiwi samgoya. We get invited to lots of these gigs, Alphonse. And you know, we come here and we represent who we are, half-breed people. I think that's why they always phone us Alphonse. We're probably the last full-blooded half-breeds around. But you know, Nusamak, and we share our stories and our language and our songs. But I always like to end on a serious note. Kokomadnistin can be serious. When they were talking earlier about Louis Riel and Sarah Riel and how old the Isla Cross is going to be. Nusamak, make sure you come and join us in 2026, if we're still alive. We're going to have a big celebration in Isla Cross. You'll come and have some, Kukum will make some lagalet, rababoo. Wow. Make sure you come and join us then. But anyways, on a serious note, so Louis Riel's sister Sarah Riel is buried in Isla Cross. Maybe you can come and visit her too when you're there. Well, she won't be talking to you, but you can go visit where she is. But I want to end with a poem that she had wrote. These are words to keep in your heart, Nusamak. Always be proud of who you are. It doesn't matter who you are, Nusamak. Be proud of who you are. And you know, I always say it's important to know where you came from in order to know where you're going. But this is her poem, not mine. I'm not that smart to write anything like that. I am a maid of a small Métis nation, and with great pride this heritage I share. I know that God, when he shaped his creation, made every race with equal loving care. Although the Métis are not many in number, great is the destiny which we command. Proud of the hate that the world heaps upon us, yet we have played a great role in this land. That one you keep in your heart, Nusamak. Okay. Alphonse, hurry up, I'm shaking. I hope they left me a little piece of fish.